Get comfortable and relax as we dive deep into the world of Cuphead. Let's explore every detail of this remarkable game together. When Cuphead was released in September 2017, it arrived like a thunderbolt from the past. A game that looked like it had been pulled directly from a 1930s animation vault, somehow brought to life on modern gaming systems. Studio MDHR, a small independent team led by brothers Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, had created something that felt impossible. A game that perfectly captured the look and feel of classic cartoons from animation's golden age, not through stylistic approximation or digital shortcuts, but through painstaking recreation of the actual techniques used nearly a century ago. Every frame hand-drawn, every background watercolour painted, every animation cell-inked and coloured by hand before being digitised. The kind of labour-intensive process that major studios had abandoned decades ago because it was too expensive, too time-consuming, too impractical for modern production. And yet here it was, a game that moved and looked exactly like a Lost Fleischer Studios cartoon, but played like the hardest boss rush you'd ever experienced. The game's visual style wasn't just impressive from a technical standpoint, it was a bold artistic statement, a rejection of the modern gaming aesthetic of photorealism, and detailed textures in favour of something warmer, more handcrafted, more soulful. In an industry obsessed with polygons and particle effects, Cuphead dared to be flat and hand-drawn and utterly gorgeous. It proved that artistry and creativity could triumph over raw technical power, that a game could be beautiful without having the biggest budget or the most advanced engine. The Moldenhauer brothers mortgaged their houses to fund this project, betting everything on a vision that most people thought was crazy. Who would want to play a game that looked old? Who would have the patience for something this difficult? Who would care about boss fights and run and gun levels when the market was dominated by open world games and online shooters? Turns out millions of people cared. Cuphead became a cultural phenomenon, selling over 6 million copies, winning countless awards, getting referenced and parodied across the internet. It proved that there was a massive audience for games that valued tight gameplay and artistic vision over scope and scale. That difficulty wasn't a barrier to success if it was fair and rewarding. That the past could inform the future in meaningful ways if approached with enough skill and respect. But Cuphead is more than just a pretty game with hard boss fights. It's a complete artistic achievement where every element reinforces the others to create a cohesive experience. The animation style, the music, the story, the gameplay, the sound design, they all work together to create something that feels like an authentic artifact from another era, while still being unmistakably a modern video game. It's a game about deals with the devil and the consequences of desperation, about friendship and loyalty tested by impossible circumstances, about facing your mistakes and trying to make things right even when the cost is terrifying. The story is deceptively simple, told through a brief animated introduction that perfectly captures the style and tone of 1930s cartoons. Cuphead and his brother Mugman live on Inkwell Isle, a place that exists in that strange cartoon logic world where anthropomorphic cups and dice and vegetables all coexist naturally. They're good kids mostly, a bit naive, a bit reckless, but fundamentally decent. One day they're wandering around and they find themselves at the Devil's Casino. Now any sensible person would turn around and leave, but Cuphead and Mugman are curious and young, and they don't fully understand the danger they're walking into. The casino's exactly what you'd expect. Bright and alluring and full of promises of easy money. And Cuphead, he gets caught up in it. He starts gambling and winning feels good, feels easy, Feels like maybe this is his lucky day. The devil himself appears, horns and pitchfork and that wide cartoon grin that's all teeth and malice. He's voiced with that perfect old-timey radio announcer cadence. Charming and dangerous simultaneously, he makes Cuphead an offer. Keep playing, roll the dice one more time, and if you win, you get all the riches in the casino. Everything. More money than you could spend in a lifetime. But if you lose, and the devil's grin gets wider here, if you lose, the devil gets your souls. Both of them. Cuphead and Mugman together. It's the classic Faustian bargain, the deal that seems too good to pass up until you realise what you're actually risking. And Cuphead, caught up in the excitement and the winning streak and the promise of wealth, he agrees. He rolls the dice without really thinking about what losing would mean, and of course he loses. The dice come up snake eyes, and the devil's expression changes from charming to terrifying, ready to collect his prize. Mugman, who's been watching this whole thing with growing horror, he grabs Cuphead and they beg for mercy. They're just kids. They didn't know what they were doing. Please, isn't there some other way? And the devil, he considers this. He's got a business proposition. See, there are other souls on Inkwell Isle who've made deals with him and haven't paid up. Debtors who owe him their souls but are trying to wriggle out of their contracts. If Cuphead and Mugman can collect those soul contracts for him, bring back proof that these debts have been paid, then maybe, just maybe, the devil will forgive their debt, will tear up their contract and let them go free. It's not mercy exactly, more like outsourcing the collection work, but it's better than the alternative, better than having their souls dragged to hell immediately. So they agree, because what choice do they have? And that's how the game begins. Two brothers setting out across Inkwell Isle to fight boss after boss, collecting soul contracts, doing the devil's dirty work because the alternative is damnation. What makes this setup brilliant is how it immediately establishes moral complexity without being heavy-handed about it. Cuphead and Mugman aren't heroes. They're not saving the world or fighting evil. They're cleaning up their own mess, and they're doing it by essentially becoming the devil's enforcers. Every boss you fight, every contract you collect, you're taking someone's soul and delivering it to hell. The game lets you feel the weight of that through the boss designs and their death animations. When you defeat a boss, they don't just explode or fade away. Their souls literally leave their bodies, transforming into ghosts that look terrified and desperate as they're pulled toward the screen, toward the contract you're collecting, toward eternal damnation. It's unsettling in a way that the cheerful animation style makes even more disturbing. These bosses beg for mercy as they die. They reach out. They realise what's happening to them. And you, playing as Cuphead and Mugman, you watch this happen over and over, collecting contract after contract, damning soul after soul. The game doesn't stop you or judge you. It doesn't give you alternatives or let you spare anyone. This is what you agreed to do. This is the price of your mistake. And if you want to save yourselves, you have to be willing to doom others. That's heavy thematic material for a game that looks like a Saturday morning cartoon. It's exploring ideas about moral compromise and the lengths people will go to save themselves, about whether the ends justify the means, about complicity and guilt and whether following orders absolves you of responsibility for your actions. These are questions the game raises through its premise, and then lets simmer throughout the entire experience, never preaching or providing easy answers, just making you sit with the discomfort of what you're doing. The world of Inkwell Isle is brought to life through backgrounds that are watercolour masterpieces, each one painted by hand with incredible attention to detail and atmosphere. The colours are slightly muted and organic. that authentic watercolour look where pigments blend and bleed in ways that digital painting can't quite replicate. The skies have texture, real paper texture visible in the paint. The clouds aren't perfect gradients, they're brush strokes with variations in tone and opacity. The ground has that slight graininess that comes from pigment settling into paper fibres. Every background feels like it was created by an artist sitting at a desk with brushes and paint, which is exactly what happened. The Moldenhauer brothers and their team spent years creating these environments, understanding that authenticity required actually using the techniques they were trying to recreate, not just approximating them digitally. The result is a world that feels warm and handmade and alive in ways that even the most detailed photorealistic environments often don't. There's humanity in these images, the slight imperfections and variations that come from human hands creating art. The world map where you select levels is particularly gorgeous. This sprawling view of Inkwell Isle with distinct regions, each with their own visual character. There's Inkwell Isle 1, the starting area with rolling hills and cheerful blue skies, establishing the baseline aesthetic before things get weirder. Inkwell Isle 2 introduces more industrial elements, factories and fairgrounds, the environment getting busier and more chaotic. Inkwell Isle 3 is darker, more ominous, swamps and circuses and places that feel actively hostile. And finally there's Inkwell Hell, the Devil's Domain, all fire and brimstone and tortured architecture that makes it clear you're in enemy territory now. Each region has its own colour palette and mood, creating a sense of progression and escalation as you move through the game. You're not just fighting harder bosses, you're descending deeper into danger, getting closer to the heart of the devil's power. The world map itself is interactive, with Cuphead and Mugman visible as tiny animated characters that you control, walking from level to level, able to explore and find secrets. It's a beautiful piece of game design that serves practical purposes while also just being lovely to look at. You can stop and appreciate the art, notice details in the backgrounds, see how different areas connect. It makes Inkwell Isle feel like a real place with geography and logic, not just a menu system disguised as a map. The character designs are where the game's artistic vision truly shines, where you can see the deep knowledge and love of 1930s animation that went into every decision. Cuphead and Mugman themselves are perfect examples of the rubber hose animation style that defined the era. Their limbs are thin and bendy, able to stretch and squash in ways that real bodies can't, but that feel natural within cartoon logic. Their heads are literally cups, ceramic mugs with bendy straws sticking out, filled with liquid that sloshes when they move. Their faces are simple, just eyes and nose, with expressions that can shift from cheerful to terrified, to determined within frames. They wear shorts and oversized shoes, the classic cartoon uniform, and they move with that bouncy, energetic quality that comes from animation that's not trying to be realistic but is trying to be expressive and appealing. Every animation is smooth, usually operating on 1s or 2s, meaning new drawings for every frame or every other frame. That's incredibly labour-intensive, requiring thousands of individual drawings for all the different movements and attacks and reactions. Modern animation usually operates on 3s or 4s to save time and money, but Cuphead committed to the traditional method because that's what gives the movement that fluid, lively quality that defines the classics. When Cuphead runs, every frame is distinct, his limbs cycling through poses with that slight wobble and imperfection that makes it feel hand-drawn. When he shoots, his hands transform into different weapons with quick, snappy transitions. When he takes damage, his face goes through elaborate pain expressions, his body recoiling with exaggerated physics. This level of animation detail extends to every boss, every enemy, every interactive element in the game. The bosses are incredible character designs, each one a fully realised creation with personality and visual storytelling baked into their appearance and movement. They're not just obstacles to overcome, they're characters, weird and wonderful and disturbing inhabitants of this cartoon world. Take Goopy Legrand from the first Isle, a giant slime blob who's also somehow a boxer, wearing gloves and bouncing around the arena. He starts as a small puddle, then grows to medium size, then massive, his expression getting more confident and aggressive as he gets bigger. His design is simple but effective, readable at a glance, with clear silhouettes and distinct phases that communicate what he's doing. Or Hilda Berg, a Zeppelin who's also a woman, or a woman who's also a Zeppelin, flying through clouds and transforming into constellations, summoning UFOs and smaller enemies. Her faces involve her literally becoming different zodiac signs, each with their own attack patterns, her face shifting from playful to angry to desperate as you damage her. Cagney Carnation is a flower, an actual flower with a face, rooted in the ground but stretching and bending to attack you with seeds and pollen and smaller plant minions. His design captures that slightly unsettling quality that some old cartoons had, where cute things could become threatening without losing their essential character. He's got this smug expression at the start, confident and dismissive, but as you hurt him, his face shows pain and anger, his petals wilting, his movements becoming more frantic. Every boss has this level of character animation, multiple expressions and poses, distinct personality visible in how they move and react. The dragon boss, Grim Matchstick, is 3 dragon heads on one body, each with different expressions and personalities, working together but also getting in each other's way. The difficulty comes not just from their attacks but from tracking 3 different targets with 3 different patterns. The robot boss, Dr. Carl's robot, is a massive mechanical creation with multiple phases that involve different parts of the robot activating and attacking independently. The design is intricate, full of details like spinning gears and electrical arcs, but still maintaining that 1930s aesthetic through the colour palette and animation style. Werner Wehrmann is a rat in a tin can, piloting it like a makeshift tank, throwing bottles and summoning other rats, fighting in what looks like a junkyard. His design plays on old caricatures and stereotypes from vintage animation, that slightly uncomfortable edge where period-accurate style brushes against content that wouldn't be acceptable today. The game walks that line carefully, using the aesthetic without replicating the racist and offensive caricatures that plagued some cartoons of the era. Jimmy the Great is a genie with a flying carpet and reality warping powers, his phases involving him transforming into puppets and sarcophagi and giant floating heads. His design is colourful and busy, maybe the most visually complex boss in the game, with intricate patterns on his clothing and decorations floating around him. Sally's stage play is a series of vignettes, a boss fight that's literally a stage production with different acts, each featuring different characters and settings. It's meta and creative, playing with the theatrical nature of boss fights while also just being a really hard challenge. Phantom Express is a train made of skeleton cars, each car a different boss with different attacks, forcing you to fight multiple enemies simultaneously, while also avoiding the track and obstacles. The design is spooky and fun, playing with that Halloween aesthetic that cartoons of the era loved, dancing skeletons and ghosts with personality. King Dice might be the most iconic character design in the game besides Cuphead himself. He's a giant anthropomorphic die, wearing a purple suit and bow tie, with a face on each side of his cubic head. He's the devil's right-hand man, the one running the casino, and his design captures that sleazy Vegas entertainer energy. He's all charm and showmanship, tap dancing and singing, but with something predatory underneath. His voice acting, provided by singer Alana Bridgewater doing her best Cab Calloway impression, is perfect for the character. Smooth and musical and dangerous, welcoming you to the show while making it clear this is going to hurt. His boss fight is unique, a gauntlet where you roll dice to determine which mini-bosses you fight before facing King Dice himself. It's RNG incorporated into boss design, frustrating but thematically appropriate for a casino. And then there's the devil, the final boss, the ultimate challenge. His design is classic, traditional devil imagery filtered through 1930s cartoon aesthetics. He's got the horns and tail and pitchfork, but he's also wearing a vest and bow tie, that dapper villain look. His face is expressive and menacing, going from grinning and playful to genuinely terrifying across his different phases. The fight takes place in hell itself, with tormented souls in the background, flames everywhere, the stakes made visually clear. His attacks involve transforming into different forms, a spider, a crying baby head, a series of platforms you have to navigate while avoiding fireballs and minions. It's one of the hardest boss fights in gaming, requiring mastery of all the skills you've learned, perfect timing and pattern recognition, and resource management. And when you finally beat him, when you land that final shot and watch him collapse in defeat, it feels earned in a way few victories in gaming do. The animation quality never drops throughout the entire game. Every single frame is hand-drawn with care and attention, maintaining consistency across hours of gameplay. Think about what that means practically. A boss fight might take you 20 attempts, each attempt lasting several minutes, and you're seeing new animations and attack patterns and reactions the entire time. That's thousands of drawings for a single encounter, all created by hand, all inked and coloured individually. The run and gun levels, which are side-scrolling shooter stages between boss fights, are just as detailed. Enemies pop out with distinct animations, backgrounds scroll with multiple layers creating parallax depth, environmental hazards move and react. There are no shortcuts, no repeated animations or palette swaps, no corners cut. Every element is given the same level of care, whether it's a major boss or a minor enemy that appears for 3 seconds. The animation even extends to UI elements and transitions. The result screen after beating a level shows your grade with a flourish, numbers spinning and fireworks exploding, all hand-drawn. The world map has little animated vignettes when you approach NPCs, characters waving or gesturing, bringing personality to even the smallest interactions. The shop run by Porkrind, a pig merchant who sells you weapons and upgrades. He's got multiple animations for browsing and purchasing, reacting to your choices. These details don't affect gameplay, don't make the game mechanically better, but they create atmosphere and immersion. They make the world feel cohesive and alive, like you're playing through an actual cartoon rather than a game that looks like a cartoon. The commitment to period-accurate techniques extends beyond just the animation. The team researched how 1930s cartoons were made, what limitations and tools were available, and tried to recreate those conditions. They studied original animation cells, analysed how colours were mixed and applied, examined the film grain and imperfections that came from photographing hand-drawn images. They added subtle effects like slight jitter and wobble to the frames, replicating the imperfections that came from physically aligning multiple layers of cell animation. They included film grain and scratches and dust particles, the kind of degradation you'd see on actual old film stock. These touches are subtle, not intrusive, but they add to the authenticity. Your brain registers that this looks like something old, something from another era, even if you can't consciously identify all the specific techniques creating that impression. The gameplay itself is brutally difficult, punishing but fair, designed for players who want to be challenged and are willing to learn through repeated failure. This isn't a game you're going to beat on your first try or your 10th or maybe even your 50th. Each boss has multiple phases with distinct attack patterns that require memorization and practice. You need to learn when to jump and when to dash, when to parry and when to just avoid, when to focus on offense and when to play defensively. The game gives you tools to succeed, various weapons and charms that modify your abilities, but it's up to you to master them. There's no leveling system to grind, no way to become overpowered through persistence rather than skill. You beat bosses by getting better at the game, by learning patterns and improving your execution. That's it. This design philosophy is old school, reminiscent of arcade games and early console titles where difficulty was part of the appeal, where beating a hard game meant something because it required genuine skill. Modern gaming has largely moved away from this approach, favouring accessibility and making sure most players can see the ending. That's not a bad thing necessarily. Games should be accessible. But there's also room for games that unapologetically demand mastery, that trust players to rise to the challenge rather than lowering the bar. Cuphead found a massive audience precisely because it was hard, because beating it felt like an accomplishment, because it respected players enough to let them fail. The difficulty comes from several factors working together. First, the bosses are aggressive and fast, constantly attacking, giving you limited windows to breathe. You're always reacting, always in danger, always one mistake away from death. Second, you have limited health, usually 3 hit points, meaning you can't afford many mistakes. Every hit matters, creates tension, makes you play carefully even as the boss is forcing you to move quickly. Third, the attack patterns are complex and layered, with multiple threats happening simultaneously. You might need to avoid projectiles while also dealing with enemies that spawn, while also managing your position on the platform, while also watching for the next phase transition. It's a lot to track, requires strong pattern recognition and spatial awareness. Fourth, the game demands precise execution of its mechanics. Jumping, dashing, parrying, shooting, all of these need to be performed accurately and at the right times. You can't button and mash your way through. You need to understand how each ability works, what situations they're useful in, how to combine them effectively. The parry mechanic is particularly important and difficult to master. Certain attacks are pink-coloured, and if you jump into them with precise timing, you parry them, bouncing off and restoring one card of your special meter. It's high risk, high reward, requiring you to move toward danger rather than away from it, with a tight timing window that takes practice to hit consistently. But mastering parrying is essential for getting good grades and building meter for special attacks. The weapon system adds strategic depth without overwhelming complexity. You can equip 2 weapons at a time, switching between them during fights, each with different properties suited for different situations. The default pea shooter fires straight forward, decent damage, unlimited ammo, reliable. The spread shot deals more damage up close, but has limited range, good for aggressive play. The chaser automatically targets enemies, lower damage but never misses, useful when you need to focus on dodging. The lobber arcs projectiles that deal heavy damage, awkward to aim but devastating when it hits. The charge shot requires you to hold the button to build power, then release for a strong blast, all or nothing damage. The roundabout fires projectiles that curve around and hit from behind, weird to use but effective against certain bosses. Each weapon has situations where it excels and situations where it's useless, encouraging you to experiment and adapt. The same boss might be easier with different weapon combinations depending on your playstyle and which phase you're struggling with. The charms work similarly, passive abilities that modify how you play. The smoke dash gives you invincibility frames during your dash, essential for aggressive dodging. The extra health gives you an additional hit point, making runs more forgiving but reducing your attack power. The auto parry automatically parries pink objects you touch, removing the execution barrier but also removing your control over when to parry. The coffee charm gives you an extra special meter card, letting you use your super more often. Choosing loadouts becomes part of the strategy, thinking about what will help you most for each specific challenge. The run and gun levels are a different type of challenge. Side-scrolling shooter stages inspired by games like Contra and Metal Slug. Instead of a single boss, you're progressing through a level filled with enemies and obstacles and environmental hazards, trying to reach the end while collecting coins scattered throughout. These levels are shorter than boss fights but require different skills, more about movement and resource management than pattern memorization. You need to balance offense and caution, killing enemies to clear paths while not getting surrounded, collecting coins for upgrades while not taking unnecessary risks. The difficulty spikes in these levels come from dense enemy patterns and platforming challenges, moments where you need to jump between platforms while avoiding projectiles while also shooting enemies. The run and gun levels are where the game feels most like a traditional shoot-'em-up, testing your reflexes and crowd control. Both boss fights and run and gun levels can be played on simple or regular difficulty, with expert difficulty unlocking after you beat the game. Simple mode removes the final phase of boss fights, making them significantly easier, but you can't get soul contracts on simple, meaning you can't progress the story. It's training wheels for learning patterns, but eventually you have to commit to regular difficulty if you want to see the ending. Regular difficulty is where the game is balanced, where most players will spend their time, learning and failing and gradually improving. Expert difficulty is for masochists, tightening attack patterns, adding more projectiles, increasing boss health, pushing the game's challenge to its absolute limit. Beating every boss on expert is one of the hardest challenges in modern gaming, requiring hundreds of hours of practice for most players. The grading system ranks your performance after each level based on speed, health remaining, and parries performed. Getting an A+ rank requires near-perfect play, beating the boss quickly without taking damage while parrying constantly. It's an additional challenge for players who've mastered the basic clear, giving them something to chase beyond just seeing the ending. The grades don't affect progression, they're purely for personal achievement and bragging rights, but they tap into that completionist drive that motivates dedicated players. Speedrunners have pushed Cuphead to its limits, finding optimal strategies and frame-perfect techniques to clear the game in under half an hour. The speedrunning community around Cuphead is active and innovative, constantly discovering new tricks and routes, proving that even years after release the game still has depth to explore. The music in Cuphead is as essential to its identity as the visuals, a fully orchestrated big band jazz soundtrack that sounds like it was recorded in the 1930s. Composer Christopher Madigan led a live jazz band to create all the music, recording actual instruments played by actual musicians rather than using digital synthesis. The result is warm and organic, with the slight imperfections and variations that make live music feel alive. The brass has bite, the drums have punch, the piano has weight. You can hear the musicians breathing, the subtle timing variations that come from human performance, the room acoustics of the recording space. It sounds authentic because it is authentic, created using the same methods and instruments that would have been available in the era the game is evoking. Each boss has their own theme that matches their personality and battle flow. The music isn't just background ambience, it's part of the storytelling, giving you information about the character and ramping up tension as the fight progresses. Many tracks feature phase transitions where the music shifts to reflect the escalating difficulty, adding new instruments or changing tempo or key as the boss transforms. Floral Fury, Cagney. Carnation's theme is bright and bouncy at first, playful piano and cheerful horns, but it gets more frantic and aggressive as the fight continues, the melody fragmenting, the percussion becoming more intense. It mirrors the boss's increasing desperation as you damage him. Dramatic fanatic Dr. Kale's robot's theme has this mechanical precision to it, steady and rhythmic like the boss itself, but with flourishes that suggest the mad scientist's personality behind the machine. Threatening Zeppelin, Hildeberg's theme is appropriately airy and floating, with swirling woodwinds and ethereal vocals, creating that feeling of being high in the clouds. Railroad Wrath, the Phantom Express theme, has driving percussion that mimics the sound of a train, with spooky organ and wailing brass that evoke classic Halloween music. Each track is memorable and distinct, the kind of music that gets stuck in your head for days after playing. King Dice's theme, Die House, might be the standout track in the whole soundtrack. It's a big band swing number with scat-singing vocals, Alana Bridgewater channeling Cab Calloway's energetic style, improvisational-sounding riffs over a tight rhythm section. The lyrics, delivered in that rapid-fire scat style, talk about gambling and deals and paying up, reinforcing the character's role as the devil's enforcer. The music is catchy as hell, which is appropriate given the context, making you want to move and snap your fingers even while you're dying repeatedly. It's a perfect example of how music can enhance character, making King Dice feel more charismatic and memorable through audio as much as visuals. The Devil's theme, One Hell of a Time, is appropriately epic and menacing, full orchestra with dramatic swells and dark harmonies. It sounds like boss music, like a final confrontation, building tension and release through its movements. But it also maintains that big band jazz foundation, keeping the game's musical identity consistent even in its most intense moment. The soundtrack won multiple awards, was nominated for Grammy consideration, got released on vinyl for collectors. It's one of those game soundtracks that works perfectly within the game, but also stands alone as quality music you'd listen to independently. That's rare. Most game music is designed to loop and not draw attention to itself, serving gameplay rather than being an end in itself. Cuphead's music does both. The sound design matches the audio quality of the music, every sound effect carefully crafted to match the period aesthetic. Gunshots have that vintage recording quality, slightly muffled and punchy rather than crisp and modern. Explosions are exaggerated and cartoony, more about impact than realism. Parrying makes a satisfying ding sound that gives clear feedback when you've nailed the timing. The voice work, what little there is performed in that classic radio play style. slightly exaggerated and theatrical. King Dice and the Devil have the most voice lines, and both performances are perfect for their characters. The Devil's voice is deep and menacing, but also hammy, that cartoon villain energy where he's clearly enjoying being evil. King Dice is smooth and musical, everything sounding like it could break into song at any moment. The lack of extensive voice acting is a deliberate choice, keeping the game closer to how early cartoons worked. Most dialogue is delivered through text boxes with simple sound effects, like characters in old comics. The game doesn't try to be cinematic in the modern sense, doesn't have long cutscenes with dramatic voice performances. It trusts its visuals and music to convey emotion and story, using dialogue sparingly for maximum impact. When characters do speak, it matters. It stands out because it's not constant chatter. This restraint is smart design, understanding that sometimes less is more, that silence and visual storytelling can be more powerful than exposition. The story, simple as it is, has multiple endings based on choices you make near the game's conclusion. After collecting all the soul contracts, you return to the Devil's Casino for the final confrontation. The Devil congratulates you on your work, impressed by your efficiency and skill. He offers you a choice. Join him. Become his agents permanently, working for him, collecting souls, wielding power as enforcers of hell. Or refuse. Fight him. Try to break your contract and free all the souls you've collected. It's a test of character, seeing whether you'll take the easy path or the righteous one. Whether fear of the devil is stronger than your moral conviction. If you agree to join the devil, you get the bad ending. The screen goes dark, text appears explaining that Cuphead and Mugman became the devil's henchmen, that they ruled Inkwell Isle with cruelty, that they became the very evil they once feared. It's short and grim, no animation or ceremony, just a text crawl over black. The game judges you for this choice, not through dialogue but through denial of content. You don't get the satisfaction of a proper ending, don't get the final boss fight, don't get resolution. The game just ends, leaving you with the weight of what you chose. It's an effective way to make the moral dimension feel real, to show that your choices have consequences beyond just which cutscene plays. If you refuse the devil, the real ending path begins. The devil becomes enraged, revealing his true demonic form, and you have to fight him in what's genuinely one of the hardest boss fights ever designed. 3 phases, each with complex patterns, limited safe spaces, attacks that cover huge portions of the screen. You need to apply everything you've learned throughout the game, all the mechanical skill and pattern recognition and strategic thinking. It's brutal and exhausting, and when you finally beat him, when you land that last shot and watch him crumble in defeat, the relief is immense. You've done it. You've beaten the devil himself. Cuphead and Mugman burn the soul contracts, freeing everyone, including themselves. All the bosses you fought, their souls return to them. They're alive again. The screen shows them celebrating, reunited with loved ones given a second chance. The ending is bittersweet though, because it acknowledges what you did. Those bosses were suffering in hell because of you. You damned them in the first place. The fact that you undid it at the end doesn't completely erase the harm. Cuphead and Mugman are free and everyone is alive, but the game doesn't let you off the hook morally. The final shot shows the brothers walking away from the casino as it crumbles, the devil defeated but the experience having changed them. They're not innocent anymore. They've seen too much, done too much, they made a mistake and then they made it right, but the journey scarred them. It's a more mature ending than you'd expect from a game with this visual style, acknowledging complexity and moral weight, rather than just providing a clean, happy resolution. The Delicious Last Course DLC, released in 2022 after years of development, expands the game with new bosses, a new playable character, and new abilities. Miss Chalice is the new character, a ghost who can be resurrected through magical cookies, giving her a physical form to fight alongside Cuphead and Mugman. Her gameplay differs slightly from the Cups. She has a double jump instead of air dash, a dodge roll with invincibility frames instead of a ground dash, and she starts with 4 health instead of 3. These changes make her easier to play for some people, more forgiving with the extra health and better dodge, but she requires adjusting to different muscle memory for movement. The DLC is set on a new isle with new bosses to fight, new contracts to collect, new challenges to overcome. The quality is identical to the base game, same hand-drawn animation, same jazz soundtrack, same punishing difficulty. Bosses like the Howling Aces, a pack of dogs in fighter planes, and Mortimer Freeze, a wizard who attacks with frozen magic, are just as creative and challenging as anything in the original. The DLC also adds Ms. Chalice's tragic backstory, explaining how she became a ghost, giving her character depth beyond just being a gameplay option. The writing is minimal but effective, using the same economical storytelling as the base game to convey emotion and history without excessive exposition. The addition of new weapons and charms expands strategic options without invalidating old strategies. The crackshot weapon fires seeking projectiles that home in on enemies, but slower than the regular chaser. The converge weapon shoots 2 streams that merge into a powerful blast when they intersect, requiring specific spacing to maximize damage. The twist-up shoots upward with a tornado effect, useful for specific boss patterns where enemies attack from above. These weapons don't replace the originals, they complement them, giving players more tools to approach challenges. The DLC proved that the Cuphead formula still had room to grow, that the team could create new content at the same quality level years after the original release. Cuphead's impact on the gaming industry has been significant and ongoing. It proved that small indie teams could create visually stunning games that competed with major studio releases, not through budget or scope, but through artistic vision and craftsmanship. It showed that there was a market for extremely difficult games that didn't compromise or include easy modes, that players would rise to meet challenges if they were fair and rewarding. It demonstrated that hand-drawn animation was viable for games, inspiring other developers to explore traditional art techniques rather than defaulting to 3D rendering or digital painting. Games like Hollow Knight and Ori had already shown that 2D games could be beautiful and successful, but Cuphead pushed the aesthetic envelope further, proving that you could commit completely to a specific art style and make it work. The game became a cultural phenomenon beyond just gaming circles. It got referenced in music videos and television shows. Artists created fan art by the thousands, drawn to the distinctive visual style and character designs. Speedrunners and challenge runners created entire communities around pushing the game to its limits. The Dark Souls comparison became inevitable, with people calling it the Dark Souls of run and gun games, which is reductive but captures something true about how both games approach difficulty and player respect. They don't hold your hand or apologize for being hard. They trust you to learn and improve, and they reward that improvement with genuine satisfaction. The development story itself became legendary in indie game circles. The Moldenhauer brothers started Studio MDHR in their homes in Canada, working on Cuphead in their spare time while maintaining day jobs. They were inspired by the cartoons they watched as kids, the Fleischer Studios' work and early Disney and Ubi-Werks animations. They wanted to create something that captured that magic, that handcrafted quality that modern animation had lost in the transition to digital production. Initial plans were modest, maybe a small boss rush game with a few characters, but as they worked, the vision expanded. They realized they could create something truly special if they committed fully, if they didn't cut corners or compromise. The decision to mortgage their houses to fund development is the stuff of indie game legend, the kind of all-in bet that either destroys you or validates your vision completely. They showed early demos at gaming conventions and the response was enthusiastic but skeptical. People loved how it looked, but questioned whether the team could actually deliver a full game at that quality level, whether the animation style would work for extended gameplay, whether anyone would actually want to play something this hard. Publishers were interested but wanted changes, wanted to include easier difficulties, or modify the art style to be more mainstream. The brothers refused, staying independent, maintaining creative control even when it meant taking on enormous financial risk. Development took 7 years, far longer than initially planned, balancing expanding scope with limited resources and manpower. They brought in more artists and animators, but kept the team relatively small, maintaining quality control through hands-on involvement in every aspect. Chad Moldenhauer directed while Jared handled art, but both were involved in all decisions, ensuring the vision stayed consistent. They studied vintage animation extensively, not just watching cartoons, but reading about how they were made, what techniques were used, why things looked the way they did. They built a library of reference material, original animation cells when they could find them, production documents, books about the era. This research informed every choice, giving them the knowledge to recreate authentically rather than just superficially mimicking the style. The game was announced years before release, building anticipation through carefully curated reveals and demos. Each showing demonstrated progress, more bosses, more levels, refined mechanics. The gaming press was consistently impressed, giving Cuphead coverage and attention that most indie games never receive. That attention created pressure, expectations building with each delay, and pushed back release date. The team could have released earlier with less content, gotten the game out and moved on. But they were committed to their vision of what the game should be, refusing to ship something incomplete or compromised. That dedication shows in the final product. There's no filler, no half-finished areas, no obvious places where they ran out of time or money. Every level feels fully realized, every boss is complete, every aspect polished to a shine. The success surprised even the optimistic predictions. 6 million copies sold puts Cuphead among the best-selling indie games ever, in the company of titles like Undertale and Stardew Valley and Terraria. It made back the development costs many times over, vindicating the brothers' bet and giving Studio MDHR the financial stability to continue making games. The DLC took years to develop because the team refused to compromise on quality, maintaining the same standards that made the original special. That's rare in the industry. Many successful games spawn quick cash grab, sequels or DLC that doesn't match the original's quality. Studio MDHR could have rushed out content to capitalize on Cuphead's popularity, but they waited, taking the time to do it right. The game's difficulty sparked endless debates about accessibility in gaming, whether games have an obligation to be completable by everyone, or whether it's acceptable to create experiences designed for skilled players. Cuphead became a flashpoint in these discussions, with some arguing it should include easier options to let more people experience the art and story, others defending the difficulty as integral to the game's identity. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Games can and should be accessible. Design choices that allow more people to play are generally good. But there's also value in games that demand mastery, that create the sense of accomplishment that comes from overcoming genuine challenge. Not every game needs to be for everyone. The gaming landscape is broad enough to include both accessible experiences and demanding ones. What's interesting is that Cuphead does include some accessibility features. They're just not traditional difficulty options. Simple mode exists for learning patterns. The weapon and charm system allows players to create loadouts that match their skill level and play style. Co-op mode lets you play with a friend, splitting responsibilities and reviving each other. These options don't make the game easy, but they provide paths for different players to engage with the content. The game respects its core difficulty while acknowledging that not everyone approaches challenges the same way. That's smart, inclusive design that doesn't compromise the vision. The community that formed around Cuphead is passionate and creative, producing guides and tutorials and challenge runs. Speedrunners have optimized routes to incredible degrees, beating the entire game in times that seem impossible if you're struggling to clear individual bosses. Challenge runners impose additional restrictions, beating the game without taking damage or without using specific weapons, or on expert difficulty with handicapped loadouts. These self-imposed challenges extend the game's life indefinitely, creating new experiences from existing content. The fact that people are still discovering new strategies and techniques years after release speaks to the game's depth and the skill ceiling's height. The visual language of Cuphead has become iconic and instantly recognizable. You can show someone a screenshot and they'll know what game it is immediately. That's rare. Most games don't have such distinctive visual identities. The rubber hose animation style, the watercolor backgrounds, the vintage film effects, they combine into something unique in gaming. Other developers have tried to capture similar aesthetics, but none have matched Cuphead's commitment and execution. It's not enough to just draw characters with bendy limbs and call it 1930s style. You need to understand the principles of squash and stretch, the timing and spacing that makes movement feel right, the colour theory and composition that makes frames visually appealing. The Cuphead team understood these fundamentals, which is why their game works where others attempting similar styles fall short. The boss design philosophy is worth examining in detail because it's so well executed. Each boss teaches you something, introduces mechanics or patterns that prepare you for later challenges. Early bosses like the Root Pack are relatively simple, telegraphing attacks clearly, giving you time to react. They establish the basics of dodging and shooting and parrying in a relatively forgiving environment. As you progress, bosses become more complex, layering multiple attack types, introducing phase transitions that change the entire fight, demanding better execution and faster reactions. By the time you reach King Dice and the Devil, you need to synthesize everything you've learned, applying skills from dozens of previous encounters. The pattern design is brilliant, using visual language to communicate what's happening and what you need to do. Pink objects can be parried. That's consistent throughout the game, a rule you can rely on. Boss attacks have tells, animations or sounds that signal what's coming, giving you frames to prepare your response. The game is hard but rarely feels unfair because it plays by consistent rules and gives you the information needed to succeed. When you die, it's usually because you made a mistake or haven't learned the pattern yet, not because the game cheated or did something random. That fairness is crucial for maintaining player engagement through difficulty. If deaths feel arbitrary, players quit in frustration. If deaths feel earned, players try again. confident they can do better next time. The phase transition design is particularly clever, using them to control pacing and prevent fights from becoming repetitive. Just when you've learned a pattern and are getting comfortable, the boss transforms, changing the entire dynamic. You need to adapt quickly, applying skills in new contexts, staying alert rather than settling into autopilot. These transitions are also narrative beats, showing the boss's desperation or true form, escalating stakes within individual encounters. When Cagney Carnation transforms into an angry face on the ground, shooting projectiles while his body becomes the hazard, it's not just a mechanical change, it's showing his fury, his refusal to accept defeat, his willingness to sacrifice his body to destroy you. That's character development through gameplay, using mechanics to tell story. The run and gun levels serve important functions beyond just variety. They provide a different pace, letting you decompress between intense boss fights. They're where you collect coins for upgrades, giving them practical value beyond just completion. They teach you about crowd control and resource management, skills that translate to certain boss fights with multiple enemies or phases, and they're just fun, different enough from boss fights to feel fresh, challenging in their own right without being as punishing. The levels have secrets and shortcuts, optional harder paths that reward exploration with extra coins. They encourage replaying, trying different routes, optimizing your performance. The secret areas and hidden content reward curiosity and experimentation. There are hidden coins scattered throughout the world map, invisible until you walk over specific spots. Finding them requires thorough exploration, paying attention to subtle visual cues, trying things that might not work. The secret bosses, accessed through hidden paths or fulfilling specific conditions, are extra challenges for dedicated players. These additions don't fundamentally change the game, but they add depth, give completionists goals beyond just beating every level. They show that the developers thought about different types of players, including content for people who want to find everything and master everything. The achievement and trophy list is well designed, encouraging skill improvement without being impossible. Beating all bosses on expert is difficult but achievable with practice. Completing the game without using a specific weapon type or charm makes you engage with systems you might otherwise ignore. Getting A+ ranks pushes you to optimize and perfect your play. These goals give players reasons to return after beating the story, new challenges that recontextualize familiar content. The achievement for beating the game without killing any bosses on simple mode is particularly clever, a way of tracking whether you've experienced the complete intended challenge without directly locking content behind difficulty gates. The Netflix animated series, announced and released years after the game, took the characters and world in a different direction, creating a kids' cartoon that's more adventure comedy than dark deal with the devil story. It's aimed at younger audiences, softening the game's edges, replacing the existential dread with light-hearted hijinks. The show has its own merits, the animation is solid and the stories are fun, but it's not really trying to be the game. It's using the characters and aesthetic to create something new, something that can exist alongside the game without replacing or redefining it. Some game fans were disappointed by the tonal shift, wanting something darker and more faithful. Others appreciated having Cuphead content that's accessible to kids, introducing new audiences to these characters. The merchandising has been extensive. T-shirts and figures and art books and vinyl soundtracks. The Cuphead art book in particular is a treasure, filled with concept art and animation frames and developer commentary. It shows the evolution of designs, early versions of bosses that got changed or cut, the iterative process of refining everything to its final form. For people interested in animation and game development, it's an invaluable resource, showing how professionals work, how ideas develop, how craft and vision combine to create something special. The vinyl soundtrack releases sold out quickly, becoming collector's items, physical objects that represent the game's audio identity. The legacy of Cuphead will likely be its demonstration that games can be art in the most traditional sense, handcrafted objects made with skill and vision, things of beauty that also function as interactive entertainment. The debate about whether games are art has always been somewhat silly. Obviously they can be, but Cuphead makes the case unavoidably. Every frame is art, every musical composition is art, the design is art. The whole package is a work of art that happens to be playable. It shows that game development can be approached with the same seriousness and craftsmanship as any other artistic medium. That the constraints of interactivity don't prevent artistic expression, they enable new forms of it. The game industry needs more projects like Cuphead, not in terms of imitating its specific style, but in terms of committing fully to artistic visions, refusing to compromise or chase trends, trusting that quality and passion will find an audience. Too many games feel focus-tested and committee-designed, safe and marketable, but without personality or soul. Cuphead has both personality and soul in abundance. It's weird and difficult and absolutely committed to its unique vision. That's what makes it special, what makes it memorable, what ensures it'll be remembered and celebrated decades from now, when most of its contemporaries are forgotten. The mechanical depth beneath the surface becomes apparent the more you play. Movement isn't just running and jumping, it's understanding momentum and precise spacing. Combat isn't just shooting, it's resource management and risk assessment. Every decision has trade-offs. Using your special attack deals huge damage but costs meter that took time to build through parrying or damage. Focusing fire on one target kills it faster, but leaves you vulnerable to others. Playing aggressively maximizes damage but increases risk. Playing defensively keeps you safe but extends fights, giving more opportunities for mistakes. These systems create emergent depth, situations where optimal play depends on context and player skill level. The parry system deserves special attention because it's so well designed and so crucial to mastering the game. Parrying is risky, requiring you to jump toward pink projectiles with precise timing, but the rewards are significant. You bounce off the parried object, gaining height and control over your positioning. You restore special meter, building toward powerful attacks. You fulfill grade requirements for getting high ranks. Learning to parry consistently transforms how you play, opening up strategies and routes that aren't possible otherwise. Some expert players parry constantly, using it as movement as much as defense, chaining parries across multiple objects to traverse levels quickly. That skill ceiling is incredibly high, creating room for players to distinguish themselves, to develop personal style and techniques. The weapon balance is surprisingly good considering how different each gun is. No weapon is clearly best in all situations. Each has matchups where it excels and matchups where it struggles. The charge shot is devastating against slow bosses with large hitboxes, but nearly useless against fast-moving targets. The spread gun deletes bosses if you can stay close but leaves you vulnerable. The chaser removes aiming but deals pathetic damage. Finding the right weapon combination for each boss in your playstyle is part of the puzzle, part of what makes repeat playthroughs interesting. Experimenting with different loadouts changes how fights feel, revealing new strategies and approaches. The visual feedback is excellent, communicating important information clearly despite the busy screen. Your health is always visible. Boss health bars let you track progress through phases. Visual cues distinguish between different projectile types. The screen flashes and shakes when you take damage, impossible to miss. The parry makes a distinct sound and gives a clear bounce animation. This clarity is crucial for a difficult game because players need reliable information to make good decisions. If you can't tell what's happening or why you died, frustration builds quickly. Cuphead always makes it clear what killed you, what you could have done differently, what you need to learn. That clarity respects players, treats them as capable of learning and improving rather than needing constant hand-holding. The difficulty curve isn't perfectly smooth. Some bosses are notorious for being harder than their placement suggests, but the overall progression works. Early bosses teach fundamentals. Mid-game bosses combine those fundamentals in complex ways. Late-game bosses demand mastery and introduce new mechanics. The final challenges require everything you've learned plus perfect execution. By the time you beat the devil, you've become genuinely skilled at the game, capable of things that would have seemed impossible at the start. That growth is part of the appeal, the satisfaction of comparing your first attempts at early bosses, dying repeatedly, to your final attempts at late bosses, executing complex strategies with confidence. You've gotten better, measurably, dramatically better, and the game's design facilitated that growth. The game's influence can be seen in subsequent indie titles that embrace specific artistic visions and challenging gameplay. While no game has directly copied Cuphead's aesthetic, many have taken inspiration from its commitment to craft and its willingness to be difficult. The indie scene has always been more willing to take risks than AAA development, but Cuphead's success emboldened developers, proving that niche appeal could translate to mainstream success if executed well enough. The game also inspired renewed interest in animation techniques, with more developers exploring hand-drawn art, traditional frame-by-frame animation, and period-specific styles. The cultural impact extended beyond gaming into broader discussions about art and craft in the digital age. In a world where everything is increasingly automated and digitally produced, where AI threatens to replace human creativity, Cuphead stands as a testament to the value of human craftsmanship. Every frame was drawn by a person, every note was played by a musician, every design was iterated on by artists who cared about getting it right. That human element is tangible in the final product, felt if not consciously identified by players. It's the difference between something made and something manufactured, between art and content. Cuphead is made, lovingly and painstakingly made, and that matters. The game's approach to storytelling through gameplay rather than cutscenes is worth noting. There are minimal story scenes, just the opening introduction and brief ending sequences. Everything else is conveyed through environmental details, character designs, musical choices, the way bosses move and react. You learn about the devil's personality through his design and voice and attack patterns, not through lengthy dialogue explaining who he is. You understand King Dice's role as entertainer and enforcer through his musical theme and his carnival game-inspired boss fight. The world building happens through implication and visual design, trusting players to pick up on details and draw conclusions. This is efficient storytelling, respecting player intelligence, refusing to over-explain or spell everything out. The game also respects player time in important ways despite its difficulty. Retries are instant, no lengthy death animations or loading screens, just a quick restart. You're back in the fight within seconds, maintaining momentum, preventing frustration from building during learning processes. Checkpoints in run and gun levels let you resume from reasonable places rather than starting over completely. The ability to switch loadouts between attempts lets you adapt without having to navigate menus. These quality of life features make the difficulty bearable, remove artificial frustration that would compound the mechanical challenge. The game is hard because the bosses are hard, not because the game wastes your time or creates obstacles beyond the actual gameplay. The replayability is substantial because skill mastery creates different experiences. Your first playthrough, struggling to survive each boss, barely scraping by, feels completely different from later playthroughs where you're chasing high ranks and perfect runs. The game you're playing is mechanically identical, but your relationship to it has changed. You're no longer fighting for survival, you're fighting for style points, for optimization, for personal bests. That transformation is rewarding, proof of your improvement, validation of time invested. Speedrunners experience this even more extremely, seeing levels not as challenges but as sequences to optimize, finding frame-perfect techniques and routing decisions that save seconds. Cuphead also succeeds as a co-op experience, designed to be played with 2 players. Having a partner changes strategies and difficulties in interesting ways. Some challenges become easier with 2 people focusing fire or dividing boss attention. Others become harder due to increased screen chaos and friendly fire. Communication becomes important, coordinating parries and specials, calling out patterns, reviving fallen partners. The local co-op requirement, no online play, was controversial, but maintains the intended experience of playing together in the same room, the social element of tackling challenges with someone physically present. That nostalgia for couch co-op, for passing controllers and collaborative problem solving is baked into the design. The game's release timing was fortunate, arriving at a moment when audiences were hungry for something different. The gaming landscape in 2017 was dominated by live service games, massive open worlds, online shooters, games designed to consume hundreds of hours. Cuphead offered something compact and focused, a game you could complete in a reasonable time frame but that rewarded mastery and skill. It was a palate cleanser, a reminder that games didn't need to be endless content machines to be valuable. A tight, well-crafted experience could be just as satisfying, maybe more satisfying than sprawling games that respect neither their mechanics nor their players' time. The technical achievement of running smoothly on the hardware of the time shouldn't be underestimated. The Xbox One and PlayStation 4 weren't particularly powerful by 2017 standards, but Cuphead maintained solid frame rates despite the amount of animation and effects on screen. The game was also released on Nintendo Switch, requiring additional optimization for even weaker hardware, and it works beautifully, maintaining the visual quality while hitting performance targets. That cross-platform success expanded the audience, letting people play on whatever system they preferred, introducing the game to Nintendo's audience who might not have encountered it otherwise. The game's pricing was reasonable, launching at a lower price point than most major releases, acknowledging its scope while still valuing the craftsmanship. This made it accessible to more players, reduced the barrier to entry, encouraged people to take a chance on something that might not be their usual genre. The value proposition is excellent. Hours of gameplay in the base game, more in the DLC, infinite replayability for people chasing completion or high-level play. You get far more entertainment per dollar than most full-priced releases, and the quality never dips, never feels padded or stretched thin to justify the cost. The game's community management and post-launch support was solid, with Studio MDHR remaining engaged with fans, sharing behind-the-scenes content, responding to feedback. The DLC announcement and development was transparent, with the team explaining why it was taking years, what they were working on, maintaining excitement without making promises they couldn't keep. That honesty and communication built trust, kept the community engaged during long development gaps. When the DLC finally released, the reception was overwhelmingly positive because it delivered exactly what was promised at the expected quality level. Cuphead's place in gaming history is secure. It'll be remembered as one of the defining indie games of the 2010s, a showcase of what small teams can accomplish with vision and dedication. It'll be studied in game design courses as an example of successful difficulty design, of how to create fair but challenging gameplay. It'll be analysed in art classes for its recreation of historical animation techniques. It'll be featured in music programs for its live-recorded jazz soundtrack. The game transcends its medium to become something studied and appreciated by people who might never play it, who encounter it through cultural osmosis and recognise it as significant. The most important lesson from Cuphead is that games don't need to compromise their visions to find success. The Moldenhauer brothers could have made countless decisions to make the game more marketable, more accessible, more likely to succeed commercially. They could have added difficulty options, simplified the art style, used digital shortcuts, aimed for broader appeal. They didn't. They made exactly the game they wanted to make, refused to budge on their vision, trusted that quality would find its audience, and they were right. That's inspiring for developers and artists in any medium, proof that staying true to your vision can work, that audiences will respond to genuine passion and craftsmanship. The game also demonstrates that nostalgia can be used effectively without being exploitative. Cuphead is inspired by 1930s cartoons, but it's not just referencing them for easy recognition. It's studying and understanding them, learning what made them work, applying those lessons in new contexts. It's respectful homage rather than shallow pastiche. That's the difference between something that trades on nostalgia and something that's genuinely influenced by the past. Cuphead loves the era it's evoking, understands it deeply, and uses that understanding to create something new, rather than just recreating what already existed. The emotional journey of playing Cuphead is distinct and memorable. The initial awe at the visuals, the growing frustration with the difficulty, the moments of breakthrough when patterns click, the elation of finally beating that boss you've been stuck on, the pride in your improvement, the satisfaction of completion. These emotions are carefully orchestrated through design, intentional outcomes of how the game is structured and balanced. The developers understood the player psychology, knew that frustration followed by success creates stronger positive emotions than easy victory. They trusted players to push through the hard parts, to stick with it, to experience the full arc of challenge and mastery. That trust in players is Cuphead's greatest strength. The game believes you can do it, believes you're capable of learning and improving, believes the challenge is worth your time. It doesn't apologise for being hard, doesn't offer easy outs, doesn't compromise. It presents itself as it is and invites you to rise to meet it. And when you do, when you finally beat that last boss and watch the credits roll, you've accomplished something real. You've mastered a genuinely difficult game through skill and persistence. That accomplishment feels meaningful in a way that completing easier games often doesn't. Cuphead respects you enough to let you fail, and in doing so, it makes success matter. Thank you for listening, and may your dreams be as colourful as an Inkwell Isle sunset. Good night.